I never imagined I'd be escorted off a plane for the crime of being black in first class. My tailored suit and CEO credentials meant nothing as I felt dozens of eyes burning into my back during that long walk down the aisle. The leather handle of my briefcase grew slick with sweat as confusion turned to humiliation, then to cold anger. What American Airlines Flight 832 didn't realize that January evening was that their act of discrimination would cost the entire flight crew their jobs exactly 60 seconds after we decided to fight back. The cabin of Flight 832 from Phoenix to New York hummed with the familiar white noise of pre-flight activity. Marcus Thorne settled into his first-class seat, the cool leather embracing him as he placed his briefcase beneath the seat in front. At 48, the tech CEO had earned his place in the premium cabin after building his company from nothing. The Phoenix sun had set outside the small, oval window, and the January chill had begun to settle across the tarmac. "Sir, I need you to gather your belongings and come with me." The voice cut through his thoughts. Marcus looked up to see an airline representative standing over him. Expression blank, voice mechanical. No explanation offered. "Is there a problem with my ticket?" Marcus asked, his mind racing through possibilities. "Please just come with me, sir." The silence that followed his question felt deliberate, calculated. Every passenger within earshot turned to watch. Marcus stood, straightened his blazer, and followed the representative. The walk down the aisle stretched into infinity. Each step felt heavier than the last as curious eyes tracked his movement. The soft carpet beneath his feet seemed to mock the hardness of the moment. What could I have possibly done, he thought. I've been seated for less than 10 minutes. The jet bridge air hit his face, stale, recycled, with the faint tang of jet fuel. Marcus stood alone for precisely 90 seconds before the door opened again. Another black man emerged, confusion etched across his features. A young man, perhaps late 20s, wearing a designer hoodie and carrying a camera bag. "They asked you to leave too?" the young man asked. Before Marcus could answer, the door opened again. Another black man, then another. Within minutes, 8 strangers stood in awkward silence, connected by 2 undeniable traits: their race and their removal. Xavier Veal, the young videographer, broke the silence. "I was in economy, row 32. Where were you all seated?" Each man answered. They had been scattered throughout the aircraft: first class, premium economy, standard economy. Different rows, different sections. "We don't know each other," Marcus stated, his voice steady despite the anger building in his chest. "We weren't seated together. We didn't board together." Elias Joseph, a military man with perfect posture and measured words, spoke next. "The only common denominator here is obvious." The airline representative finally returned. Her eyes darted nervously between the 8 men, clearly unprepared for the confrontation forming before her. "There was a complaint about body odor," she said, the words tumbling out with obvious discomfort. The absurdity hung in the air. 8 strangers, seated apart from one another, all simultaneously accused of the same subjective offense. "That's impossible," Marcus said, his CEO voice emerging, the voice that closed million-dollar deals and commanded boardrooms. "Are you telling me every black man on this flight coincidentally has this issue?" Xavier had already pulled out his phone, its camera lens capturing the unfolding injustice. "I need your name," he said to the representative. "And I need the name of whoever made this decision." Have you ever felt the sudden, sickening realization that you're being judged not for who you are, but what you are? That moment when your accomplishments, your character, your very humanity is reduced to a stereotype? If you have, you'll understand what these 8 men experienced on that jet bridge. If you haven't, keep watching, because in the next 10 minutes, you'll see how this blatant discrimination transformed into a movement that would permanently change an entire airline's policies and terminate the careers of those responsible. But first, let me ask you, would you have gotten back on that plane? Or would you have walked away, swallowing the injustice to avoid further confrontation? The decision these 8 strangers made next would alter the course of their lives forever. 20 years before that fateful January evening on Flight 832. Marcus Thorne slept on a mattress on the floor of a garage in Oakland. The makeshift office housed 3 computers, a mini fridge, and dreams larger than the cramped space allowed. His software company, Thorne Tech Solutions, began with a single client, and a revolutionary algorithm that streamlined supply chain logistics. When I started, I heard no from 37 investors. Marcus often told aspiring entrepreneurs at conferences. 37 doors closed before one opened. That one door led to a $500,000 seed investment. Within 5 years, Thorntech Solutions managed data for Fortune 500 companies. By year 10, Marcus employed over 300 people. The garage became a glass tower in downtown Phoenix. His mattress on the floor transformed into a corner office, overlooking the desert city. Now, at 48, Marcus stood on the precipice of his career's crowning achievement, a merger worth $2.3 billion that would secure his legacy and revolutionize data management across industries. The documents awaiting his signature in New York represented 20 years of relentless work, sleepless nights, and countless sacrifices. All this swirled through his mind as he stood on that jet bridge, stripped of his status by a single, baseless accusation. "They can't just remove us like this," said Xavier Viel. The youngest among them at 29, Xavier had built his reputation as a visual storyteller. His documentary on housing discrimination had garnered awards at independent film festivals, and his freelance videography business had recently secured contracts with major media outlets. His camera had captured protests, celebrations, and everyday moments of Black excellence. "This isn't the first time American Airlines has done this," Xavier continued, scrolling through his phone. In 2017, the NAACP issued a travel advisory against them. They warned Black travelers about disrespectful, discriminatory, or unsafe conditions after multiple incidents. Elias Joseph nodded, his posture military straight despite the tension evident in his jaw. At 36, the former Marine carried himself with the discipline ingrained through 2 tours overseas. His transition to civilian life had led him to a career in cybersecurity, his expertise in protecting digital infrastructure making him a sought-after consultant. "The advisory was lifted in 2018, Elias added, his voice measured despite the anger. Behind his eyes, American Airlines promised comprehensive changes. They claimed to have addressed the issues. A bitter laugh escaped Marcus's throat. Clearly, those changes didn't stick. The airline representative shifted uncomfortably under the collective gaze of the 8 men. Her clipboard seemed to serve as a shield between her and the mounting tension. "Again, sir, there was a complaint about body odor from one of our flight attendants," she repeated, her voice wavering slightly. "Which one of us specifically?" Marcus challenged. "We were seated in different sections. We don't know each other. We weren't traveling together." The representative's silence spoke volumes. "You expect us to believe that each of us, 8 separate Black men, coincidentally has the same issue?" Xavier pressed. "That's statistically impossible." Another man, who introduced himself as Alvin Jackson, stepped forward. The financial analyst's voice remained calm, but his words cut through the pretense. "Let's be clear about what's happening. Every Black male passenger on that flight has been removed. That's not coincidence. That's discrimination." The 8 strangers began to share details, piecing together a disturbing pattern. A white male flight attendant had been observed moving through the cabin before takeoff, engaged in hushed conversation with other crew members. Shortly after, the removals began, strategic, methodical, one by one. "They didn't want to create a scene," Elias observed. "By removing us individually, they hoped we wouldn't notice the pattern." The strategy had backfired spectacularly. By forcing these 8 men into the same confined space, American Airlines had inadvertently created a powerful coalition, successful professionals from various fields, united by a shared humiliation and growing resolve. The representative excused herself, promising to return with more information. The moment she disappeared, the men formed a tight circle, exchanging phone numbers and business cards. "This isn't just about us anymore," Marcus said. "This is about every Black traveler who boards a plane wondering if today's the day they'll be humiliated for existing." Xavier's filmmaker instinct kicked in as he assessed their situation with analytical precision. "They're banking on us being too tired, too concerned about our destinations, or too intimidated to fight back. They've created a no-win scenario: miss our connections or accept discrimination as the cost of travel." For Marcus, the stakes extended beyond the personal humiliation. The merger documents awaited his signature in New York tomorrow. Years of work hung in the balance. The other men faced similar pressures: important meetings, family obligations, professional commitments. They know we have places to be, Elias said, voicing what they all felt. They're counting on our need to reach our destinations, outweighing our demand for dignity. The representative returned, this time accompanied by a gate agent. The news, delivered, only intensified the absurdity of their situation. They would be rebooked on later flights, forced to wait hours in the terminal while Flight 832 continued without them. "This is unacceptable," Marcus stated, his CEO voice filling the jet bridge. "We demand to speak with the supervisor immediately." The body odor accusation crumbled further under scrutiny. No passenger had complained. No crew member had approached any of them individually about the alleged issue before removal. No opportunity had been given to address the supposed concern. "Do you realize how this looks?" Xavier asked the gate agent directly. "Every black man removed from a flight based on a subjective claim that can't be disproven? This is textbook discrimination." The 8 men stood shoulder to shoulder now, no longer confused strangers, but united in purpose. Their collective credentials: CEO, filmmaker, cybersecurity expert, financial analyst, military veteran, among others, formed an impressive front. These were men accustomed to navigating professional spaces, familiar with corporate policies and legal rights. As minutes turned to an hour, their resolve hardened. Phone calls were made to family members, colleagues, and in Marcus's case, to his corporate attorney. Word began to spread beyond the confines of the jet bridge. Social media posts appeared. Texts circulated. The invisible became visible. "They didn't count on us finding each other," Elias said quietly. "They didn't expect us to become witnesses for one another." The airline's position grew increasingly untenable as the 8 men refused to disperse, refused to accept the flimsy justification, and most importantly, refused to be silenced. The architecture of discrimination that had seemed so solid when targeting individuals began to crack when confronted by collective resistance. Flight 832 remained at the gate, its departure time repeatedly pushed back as the standoff continued. Other passengers peered curiously through windows, witnesses to the unfolding confrontation. The airline's attempt at quiet removal had transformed into a public relations nightmare, gaining momentum with each passing minute. What happened next would fundamentally alter the trajectory of American Airlines' corporate policies and demonstrate the power of solidarity in the face of injustice. The battle that began on that jet bridge would eventually reach federal court, terminate the careers of an entire flight crew, and force one of America's largest carriers to overhaul its approach to passenger removals. But first, these 8 strangers had to decide: accept rebooking and the implied admission of wrongdoing, or stand their ground and demand immediate justice. For Marcus Thorne, the decision crystallized with perfect clarity. The billion-dollar merger awaiting his signature suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the principle at stake. He stepped forward, the natural leader even in this unexpected coalition. "We're not going anywhere," he announced, "except back to our assigned seats on Flight 832. Record everything." Those 2 words from Xavier Viel changed the entire dynamic on that jet bridge. In one fluid motion, he pulled his professional-grade smartphone from his pocket and pressed the red button. The device, typically used to capture documentary footage of community activism, now documented their own struggle in real time. "I'm recording this interaction for our protection," Xavier announced clearly, holding the phone at eye level. His steady hand reflected years of practice maintaining composure while filming tense situations. "We've been removed from Flight 832, and we're requesting a clear explanation." The airline employees visibly stiffened. The camera transformed the power dynamic instantly. No longer were these employees anonymous representatives of corporate policy. They became individuals whose words and actions would be preserved, scrutinized, and potentially shared with millions. "Please put that away," the representative requested, her voice tight. "I have every legal right to record in this public space," Xavier responded calmly, "especially when documenting potential civil rights violations." The word violations hung in the air like static electricity. The other 7 men positioned themselves behind Xavier, a visual representation of their unified front. The red recording, Light became a beacon that drew them together, strangers now bonded through shared injustice and collective purpose. Marcus stepped forward, his CEO presence commanding attention even in this chaotic moment. We need to speak with someone who can explain why 8 black men, seated separately and unknown to each other, were all removed from this flight. The gate agent, a woman in her 40s with a nameplate reading Diane, joined the growing assembly. Her eyes darted between the men and the recording device, calculation evident in her expression. She had worked for the airline for 15 years and recognized the potential liability unfolding before her. "Let me try to sort this out," she said, attempting to regain control of the situation. There was a complaint from a flight attendant about body odor. Xavier finished her sentence. "Yes, we've heard that explanation. Are we to believe that 8 separate black men, seated throughout different cabins, all coincidentally have the same issue? What are the statistical odds of that?" Diane's professional mask slipped momentarily, discomfort flashing across her features. "I understand how this looks." "How it looks?" Elias Joseph's military discipline barely contained his indignation. "It doesn't just look discriminatory, it is discriminatory. Every black male passenger removed, while everyone else remains seated. That's the definition of racial profiling." Xavier zoomed in slightly on Diane's face, capturing her conflicted expression. "Do you believe this would have happened if we were white executives in first class?" The question hung in the air for 5 excruciating seconds. The camera recorded it all, the hesitation, the internal struggle playing across Diane's features, the moment when professional loyalty collided with personal ethics. "I agree," she finally said, her voice low but unmistakable. "I agree." The admission stunned them all. An American Airlines employee had just acknowledged, on camera, the racial motivation behind their removal. It was a momentary crack in the corporate facade, a human being momentarily overtaking the employee. "I need that statement again, clearly," Xavier pressed, seizing the critical moment. "You agree this appears to be racial discrimination?" Diane looked directly into the camera, her decision made. "I agree that the removal of only black male passengers creates the appearance of discrimination. I cannot speak to the intent, but I understand your concerns completely." The admission electrified the group. What had been their subjective experience was now validated by someone within the system itself. The recording secured what would otherwise have been dismissed as perception or oversensitivity. "We need to speak with the flight crew responsible," Marcus insisted. "And we need to be rebooked immediately." Diane nodded and disappeared back into the terminal, presumably to arrange alternate flights. For the next 45 minutes, the men maintained their position on the jet bridge, sharing their respective backgrounds and discovering their collective strength. A tech CEO, a documentary filmmaker, a cybersecurity expert, a financial analyst, a marketing executive, a graduate student, a medical device salesman, and a music producer, accomplished professionals across diverse fields, reduced to stereotypes. By a single biased decision, when Diane returned, her expression told the story before her words confirmed it. "There are no available flights to New York tonight. The earliest rebooking would be tomorrow morning." The airline's logistical failure completed their strategic collapse. They had removed 8 passengers without the means to transport them to their destination. The bluff had been called. "So our options are to miss critical professional commitments or to accept discrimination as the cost of air travel?" Marcus asked, his voice resonating with controlled anger. "That's not acceptable." The 8 men conferred briefly, their decision unanimous. "We demand to be returned to our assigned seats on Flight 832, Marcus announced, speaking for the group. "And we expect a formal apology from the flight crew responsible for this discriminatory action." Diane disappeared again, this time for nearly 20 minutes. The jet bridge had become a battleground, and the men held their position with unwavering resolve. Xavier's phone continued recording, capturing every moment of the standoff. When Diane returned, accompanied by a man who introduced himself as the station manager, the concession was evident in their body language before they spoke. "Gentlemen, we apologize for the confusion and inconvenience," the manager began, choosing his words carefully in view of the recording device. "You are welcome to return to your assigned seats. The flight crew has been made aware of the situation." Victory, but with a bitter aftertaste. The word confusion minimized the discrimination they had experienced. Inconvenience failed to capture the humiliation of being paraded off an aircraft while dozens of passengers watched. This wasn't confusion, Marcus corrected firmly. This was discrimination. We expect that to be acknowledged in writing. The station manager hesitated. I can provide each of you with incident reports to document your experience. Customer relations. We'll follow up within 72 hours. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. The men had successfully forced the airline to reverse its decision, but the true battle for accountability lay ahead. The reboarding process proved nearly as degrading as the removal. As they walked back through the cabin, they felt the weight of annoyed stares from fellow passengers inconvenienced by the hour-long delay. Passengers unaware that these 8 men were victims, not causes, of the disruption. Marcus reclaimed his first-class seat, jaw tight, as the same white male flight attendant who had initiated the removals avoided eye contact while adjusting the temperature controls nearby. In economy, Xavier kept his camera visible as he settled back into row 32, a silent reminder of his readiness to document any further issues. The flight attendants moved through their safety demonstrations with mechanical efficiency, studiously, avoiding interaction with the 8 men who had challenged their authority. The tension in the cabin was thick enough to touch as the aircraft finally pushed back from the gate. Over an hour behind schedule, as the plane accelerated down the runway, Marcus gazed out his window at the Phoenix lights fading beneath them. The merger documents still awaited his signature in New York, but something more significant had begun on that jet bridge, a case that would eventually lead to federal court, force corporate accountability, and change airline policy forever. The true fight was just beginning. In the cabin's dim lighting, Marcus opened his laptop and began typing an email to his attorney, the words flowing with clarity and purpose. By the time Flight 832 reached cruising altitude, the foundations of a landmark discrimination case were taking shape in a simple text document titled American Airlines Incident, January 5, 2024. What the flight attendants didn't realize as they avoided eye contact with these 8 passengers was that their careers had effectively ended the moment. Xavier pressed record. In less than a year, the evidence captured on that jet bridge would cost them their jobs, force a corporate giant to admit wrongdoing, and permanently alter how passenger removals were handled across an entire airline. The aircraft soared eastward through the night sky, carrying not just passengers but the seeds of a legal battle that would transform airline policy and prove that sometimes justice is delivered at 30,000 feet. Flight 832 touched down at JFK International Airport at 2:17 a.m., nearly 3 hours behind schedule. The passengers disembarked in sleepy silence, most unaware of the discrimination that had caused their delay. As the 8 men collected their belongings from overhead compartments, they exchanged knowing glances. A brotherhood forged through. Shared injustice. Conference room at the Marriott, 9 a.m. tomorrow. Marcus whispered to Xavier as they waited in the jet bridge. Spread the word to the others. Despite the late arrival, sleep eluded Marcus that night. He paced his hotel room, replaying the events on the jet bridge in Phoenix. The merger documents sat untouched on the desk. For the first time in his career, a business deal worth billions seemed secondary to a greater purpose. At precisely 9 a.m., 6 of the 8 men gathered in the small conference room Marcus had reserved. 2 couldn't make it. 1 had an early meeting. Another had continued to Boston, but they joined via video call, their faces serious on the large screen mounted to the wall. I've spoken with my attorneys, Marcus began, standing at the head of the table. They believe we have a strong case for racial discrimination. Xavier placed his phone in the center of the table and played the video he'd recorded. The gate agent's admission, "I agree," echoed through the room, more powerful in retrospect than it had seemed in the moment. This is irrefutable evidence, Elias said, his military precision evident in his analysis. They can't claim miscommunication or misunderstanding when their own employee acknowledged the discriminatory pattern. Alvin Jackson, the financial analyst, leaned forward. The question is, do we want compensation or do we want change? The question hung in the air for several moments. Both, Marcus finally said. Financial settlement acknowledges harm done. Policy change prevents future harm to others. They voted unanimously to pursue legal action, not as individuals seeking personal redress, but as a united front demanding systemic change. By noon, they had engaged the prestigious civil rights law firm Outen and Golden along with Public Citizen Litigation Group to represent them. For the next 4 months, they built their case methodically. The attorneys gathered flight manifests proving they were the only black male passengers on Flight 832. They collected sworn statements from witnesses. They analyzed American Airlines history, including the 2017 NAACP travel advisory that had warned black travelers about disrespectful, discriminatory, or unsafe conditions on the airline. On May 29, 2024, they filed a federal lawsuit in the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of New York, alleging blatant and egregious race discrimination by American Airlines. The court filing coincided with Xavier posting a carefully edited version of the jet bridge video online. His documentary filmmaker instincts guided his presentation, just 2 minutes of footage that captured the essence of their experience, including the critical admission from the gate agent. The video exploded across social media platforms. 10,000 views in the first hour, 100,000 by evening, 2 million by the following morning. News organizations picked up the story, their headlines capturing the outrage. 8 black men removed from American Airlines flight, all accused of same offense and discrimination at 30,000 feet. Black CEO among passengers profiled on AA flight. American Airlines' initial response came within hours of the video going viral, a generic statement expressing concern and promising to investigate the matter thoroughly. The corporate speak contrasted sharply with the raw humanity captured in Xavier's footage, further fueling public indignation. Notice they're investigating the matter, not the discrimination, Xavier pointed out during a Zoom call with the group. They're already trying to distance themselves from what happened. The lawsuit filing triggered formal legal processes that forced American Airlines beyond platitudes. They could no longer hide behind vague statements or promises to investigate. Court documents required specific responses to specific allegations. The power dynamic had shifted completely. Marcus received a call from a senior vice president at American Airlines 3 days after the lawsuit was filed. The executive's voice carried the practiced concern of crisis management. "Mr. Thorne, we want to resolve this situation amicably. Perhaps we could discuss settlement options that would satisfy your concerns." Marcus's response was measured but firm. Any settlement must include 3 non-negotiable elements: substantial compensation acknowledging the harm done, termination of the crew members responsible, and concrete policy changes to prevent similar incidents in the future. The executive promised to take these requests under advisement. Translation: they needed time to calculate whether fighting the case would cost more than settling it. That calculation changed dramatically on June 14th when 3 major corporate clients of American Airlines, including a Fortune 50 technology company, announced they were reviewing their travel contracts in light of the discrimination allegations. The financial implications suddenly extended far beyond any potential settlement amount. 4 days later, American Airlines CEO Robert Isom issued a letter to all 133,000 employees. Unlike the initial corporate statement, this communication contained no equivocation. "I am incredibly disappointed by what happened on Flight 832 and the breakdown of our procedures," he wrote. "We fell short of our commitments and failed our customers in this incident. Let me be absolutely clear. Discrimination of any kind does not represent who we are or what we stand for as a company." The letter announced that the flight crew involved had been suspended pending further investigation and that American Airlines would create a new advisory council focused on passenger rights and dignity. While stopping short of admitting legal liability, the CEO's message represented the first significant crack in the corporate defense. Media requests flooded in for the 8 plaintiffs. Morning shows, evening news programs, podcast hosts, and newspaper reporters all sought their perspective. Their attorneys advised caution, suggesting they limit public comments while the case proceeded. Xavier, however, recognized the power of controlling their narrative. "The courts move slowly," he argued during a strategy session. "Public opinion moves at the speed of social media. We need to keep this story alive." They compromised. 3 of the 8 men, Marcus, Xavier, and Elias, would participate in select media appearances, carefully coordinated with their legal team. Their message remained consistent. This wasn't about money. It was about accountability and preventing future discrimination. Marcus appeared on a major network morning show, his CEO confidence evident as he fielded questions. "Would you fly American Airlines again?" the host asked. "I would fly an American Airlines that acknowledges its mistakes, holds discriminatory employees accountable, and implements real policy changes," Marcus replied. "What I won't accept is an American Airlines that removes black passengers based on biased perceptions and then hides behind corporate statements." The interview garnered another million views online, further pressuring the airline as the lawsuit proceeded through initial motions and discovery phases. In July, a critical turning point arrived. The plaintiff's attorneys deposed the flight attendant who had initiated the removals. Under oath, his explanation crumbled. He claimed to have received complaints from other passengers, but could identify none specifically. He insisted the odor issue was real, but admitted he had not personally spoken with any of the removed passengers about it. Most damaging, he acknowledged that all passengers he identified for removal were black men, while admitting he had bypassed several white male passengers who might have met the same subjective criteria. The deposition transcript, while not publicly released in full, was partially quoted in subsequent court filings. These quotes made their way to transportation reporters who specialized in airline coverage. The flight attendant's contradictory testimony became a secondary news cycle, reinforcing the discrimination narrative. By August, internal pressure mounted. Within American Airlines, employee resource groups demanded transparency about the incident and the company's response. Flight attendants' union representatives expressed concern that the actions of one crew were damaging the reputation of all members. Shareholders questioned the leadership's handling of the crisis during quarterly earnings calls. September brought another video. This one leaked from within American Airlines itself. A recording of a company-wide town hall showed executives fielding uncomfortable questions from employees about the Flight 832 incident. One senior vice president was captured saying, "While we can't comment on ongoing litigation, I want to be clear that what happened does not reflect our values or training." This inadvertent admission further strengthened the plaintiff's position. Their attorneys immediately filed it as supplemental evidence in the ongoing case. In October, American Airlines approached the plaintiffs with their first formal settlement offer. The proposal included financial compensation but was vague on policy changes and made no mention of personnel actions against the flight crew. "They're testing our resolve," Marcus told the group during their discussion of the offer. "They want to see if we'll take the money and drop the demand for systemic change." They rejected the offer unanimously. November brought increased pressure from multiple directions. The Department of Transportation opened its own investigation into the incident. Corporate clients continued to reduce their American Airlines bookings. And most significantly, a whistleblower from within the airline contacted the plaintiff's attorneys with documentation of previous, similar incidents that had been quietly resolved without policy changes. By early December, American Airlines returned with a substantially revised settlement offer. This version included not only increased financial compensation, but also specific commitments to policy revisions regarding passenger removals and an acknowledgement that personnel actions had been taken against the crew members involved. "They've met two of our three demands," Marcus noted during the group's discussion. "They're offering policy changes and suggesting the crew has faced consequences, but they're deliberately vague about what those consequences are." The 8 men, now bonded through months of legal battles and shared purpose, faced a critical decision: accept this improved but still imperfect offer or continue fighting for complete transparency and accountability. Their decision would determine not just the outcome of their case, but potentially set precedent for how corporations respond to discrimination incidents in the future. The power had shifted, but how would they use it? "We need confirmation," Marcus Thorne's voice carried across the conference room on December 15th, where 7 of the 8 plaintiffs had gathered to discuss the latest settlement offer. The 8th joined by video call, his face serious on the wall-mounted screen. "The policy changes look substantial," Elias acknowledged, tapping the document with his index finger. "But they're still dancing around what happened to the flight crew. Without explicit confirmation of termination, we're letting them off the hook." Xavier nodded in agreement. Vague personnel actions could mean anything from a written warning to a temporary suspension. That's not accountability. Their attorney, a veteran civil rights litigator, leaned forward. I can push for clarification on the crew's status. But I should warn you, they may walk away rather than explicitly admit to terminations in the settlement document. Companies rarely document firing decisions in legal agreements due to potential wrongful termination countersuits. Marcus stood, his decision made. Then we need verification through back channels before we sign. I have contacts in the industry who can confirm the crew's employment status without compromising our legal position. Within 48 hours, Marcus's industry connections provided the information they sought. The flight attendant who initiated the removals had been terminated, along with 3 other crew members who participated in the discriminatory action. The pilot, who had ultimately allowed the removals to proceed, received a 6-month suspension and mandatory retraining. Armed with this knowledge, the plaintiffs reconvened on December 18th. The vote was unanimous. They would accept the settlement with one final amendment, a clause preventing American Airlines from rehiring the terminated employees that on December 19, 2024, almost a full year after the incident on Flight 832, the settlement was signed. While the financial terms remained confidential, the policy changes were made public as part of the agreement. These changes represented the most significant victory, a lasting transformation that would protect countless future passengers. The new American Airlines passenger removal protocol contained several groundbreaking provisions. First, the single employee trigger was eliminated. No longer could one flight attendant's subjective assessment lead to a passenger's removal. For non-safety or security issues, such as dress code violations or comfort concerns, at least 2 crew members must independently assess the situation. Second, a remote oversight mechanism was instituted before any passenger could be removed. For subjective reasons, the crew must contact a specially trained complaint resolution official, CRO, via telephone. This official, working from a central location rather than on the aircraft, would provide an objective third-party assessment free from the emotional dynamics of the cabin environment. Third, documentation requirements were strengthened. Any passenger removal must be logged with specific details: the nature of the complaint, the steps taken to address it before removal, the names of crew members involved, and demographic information about the affected passenger. This data would be reviewed quarterly to identify potential patterns of bias. Fourth, enhanced training was mandated for all customer-facing staff, with specific modules addressing unconscious bias and cultural sensitivity. This training would be developed in consultation with civil rights organizations and diversity experts. Most significantly, American Airlines agreed to regular compliance audits by an independent third party. The results of these audits would be shared with the plaintiff's attorneys for a period of 5 years, ensuring sustained implementation rather than short-term damage control. The settlement made headlines across major news outlets. While American Airlines' public statement carefully avoided admitting liability, the extensive policy changes spoke louder than any carefully crafted PR language. Industry analysts noted that the new protocols went beyond what was legally required, a tacit acknowledgement of how badly the company had failed. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg addressed the settlement during a press conference, calling it a model for how transportation providers should respond to incidents of discrimination. He announced that the Department of Transportation would consider similar requirements for all U.S. airlines as part of its regulatory review process. 3 weeks after the settlement, Marcus sat in his Phoenix office, gazing at the framed photograph that now held the place of honor on his wall. It showed the 8 plaintiffs on the courthouse steps after filing their lawsuit, 8 strangers united by shared purpose. The merger documents that had seemed so crucial a year ago were tucked away in a drawer, their importance diminished by the fight for something far more valuable. His executive assistant knocked softly before entering. "Your 2 p.m. is here." Marcus nodded, straightening his tie as he prepared to meet with a young black entrepreneur seeking mentorship. Before heading to the conference room, he paused at his desk, opening an email that had arrived that morning. It was from a flight attendant, not from American Airlines, but from a competing carrier. The message was simple but profound. "What you did changed things for us too. Our airline just announced new removal protocols modeled after the American Airlines settlement. Thank you for fighting when it would have been easier to walk away. The impact was spreading beyond a single airline, creating ripples across the entire industry. Marcus smiled as he closed the email. That was the true victory, not the confidential sum deposited in his bank account, but the invisible shield of protection now extending over countless passengers who would never know how close they had come. To similar humiliation in the months that followed, the 8 men stayed connected. Xavier produced a short documentary about their experience, which premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival. Elias developed a cybersecurity workshop specifically for minority-owned businesses. Alvin Jackson started a financial literacy program. In underserved communities, their individual lives continued, enriched by new purpose and unexpected brotherhood. But perhaps the most powerful moment came 6 months after the settlement, when Marcus boarded an American Airlines flight from Phoenix to Chicago. As he settled into his first-class seat, a flight attendant approached. For a moment, old tension flared, but the woman simply smiled and said, "Mr. Thorne, we're honored to have you aboard today. If there's anything you need during your flight, please don't hesitate to ask." Marcus nodded, returning her smile. "Thank you. I appreciate that." As the plane taxied toward the runway, he gazed out the window at the vast desert landscape. The lawsuit had never been about preferential treatment or special attention. It had been about something far more fundamental: the right to exist in public spaces without having to justify that existence. The right to be treated with basic human dignity. The right to be seen as an individual rather than a stereotype. The plane accelerated down the runway, lifting into the clear blue sky. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the subtle pressure of ascent. 1 year ago, 8 strangers had found themselves united by discrimination on a jet bridge. Today, their legacy soared with every American Airlines flight, invisible but permanent, woven into policy, procedure, and precedent. Some victories don't come with trophies or public acclaim. Some justice happens quietly, in amended manuals and revised protocols. But perhaps those are the most profound victories of all, the ones that change not just a moment, but the future itself. 1 year after Flight 832, the impact of 8 strangers. Unified Stand continues to reshape air travel across America. The Flight 832 protocols, as industry insiders now call them, have been adopted by 4 major airlines beyond American. These standardized procedures protect passengers from arbitrary removal based on subjective judgments or implicit bias. Transportation equity advocates cite the case as a watershed moment that transformed how airlines handle passenger disputes. Flight crews nationwide now undergo enhanced bias recognition training, with removal decisions requiring multiple levels of verification before action can be taken. For Marcus Thorne, the victory transcends corporate policy changes. "That merger I was rushing to complete seems insignificant now," he reflected during a commencement address at Howard University. "We discovered that our greatest power wasn't in our professional credentials or bank accounts. It was in our unified voices demanding to be treated with basic human dignity." The 8 men still meet annually on January 5th, commemorating not the discrimination they faced, but the justice they achieved. Their legacy flies on with every takeoff, an invisible but powerful reminder that sometimes the most important journeys aren't measured in miles, but in progress.